This unique story begins by showing a village in America, located deep within a forest. The people living there never stepped outside the village, and the reason for this was only one: because dangerous creatures and monsters roamed around the forest. These creatures had bodies that were half human and half animal. Out of fear of these terrifying beings, the villagers had trapped themselves inside their settlement. To protect themselves, they had built high wire fences around the village to ensure that nothing could enter. Life for these villagers was filled with fear, constantly haunted by the thought that one day, those dangerous creatures might invade their village and devour them all. Because of this, guards were always stationed around the perimeter to warn the people before any attack could occur. Now, within this village, we see a man whose young son had fallen gravely ill. However, the villagers were helpless, as they couldn't take the child outside for treatment. A decision was made to treat the child within the village itself, but this was nearly impossible because they lacked the necessary medical equipment. Tragically, the child did not survive. The entire village was deeply saddened, but the father was especially heartbroken. He sat by his son's grave, crying inconsolably. More than anything, he was consumed by guilt. If he had taken his son to the city, perhaps he could have been saved. But because of the terrifying creatures lurking in the forest, he could do nothing to save him. The next evening, as all the villagers gathered for dinner, eerie sounds suddenly began echoing from the dense forest. These sounds were so horrifying that even the bravest among them were terrified. Everyone knew exactly which monstrous creatures these sounds belonged to. Among them was a madman who, instead of being afraid, started laughing. He had no idea what kind of danger lurked beyond the forest. The villagers had domesticated many animals, gradually increasing their numbers so they could have a steady supply of meat. At the same time, they would throw pieces of meat outside the village, believing that if the creatures fed on it, they wouldn't feel the need to enter their settlement. Along with their homes, they had also built schools and shelters for the animals inside the village. Now, we see two young women working, following their daily routine. As they go about their tasks, they suddenly spot a bright red flower growing in the grass. As soon as they saw it, the two women became extremely frightened. Without wasting a moment, they rushed over, plucked the flower, and buried it deep in the ground as quickly as possible. This revealed that the villagers had an intense fear of the color red. The reason was that the dangerous creatures, half human, half animal, also wore red clothing on their bodies. Next, we are introduced to a professor who was on his way to school, as usual. Along the way, he noticed a group of children huddled around something, poking at it repeatedly. Curious, the professor approached them, only to discover a gruesome sight: a dead animal whose skin had been completely stripped off. He couldn't understand who could have done such a thing. However, for the time being, he instructed all the children to go inside the school and proceeded with his class. During the lesson, the children asked the professor if the terrifying creatures from the forest were responsible for the brutal state of the animal. The professor reassured them, saying that those creatures could not enter the village, so there was no need to be afraid. He speculated that the animal had likely been attacked by a fox or a wolf. His calm explanation eased the children's fears. Meanwhile, a large group of villagers had gathered for a discussion and to make an important decision. During the meeting, a man named Dr. Tramp stepped forward. He requested permission to leave the village so that he could bring back better medicines. The recent death of the sick child had happened due to a lack of medical supplies and equipment. He warned that if they didn't bring in proper medicine, more deaths would follow. After much deliberation, the villagers decided against it. They believed that leaving the village was too risky and could potentially invite the deadly creatures inside. They feared that if even one of those bloodthirsty monsters made its way into the village, it would be catastrophic. Ultimately, Dr. Tramp's request was denied. That night, Tramp's companion was assigned the duty of guarding the village. Tramp went over to chat with his friend while he stood watch. He casually asked, "Have you ever wished to leave this village? Who knows what kind of world exists beyond these borders?" But his friend firmly replied, "Our elders have told us that beyond this village, only dangerous creatures exist. And at least we are able to survive inside this village. That, in itself, is a big deal for me." The next day, the entire village was in shock. Many of their animals had been mysteriously killed, their skins stripped away. A meeting was immediately called to discuss this alarming situation. Some villagers believed that the deadly creatures from outside the forest were responsible. However, the senior members of the village insisted that the creatures couldn't enter. If they had, everyone would have noticed because of their massive size. They reasoned that the killings were likely the work of foxes or other small predators and assured the villagers that there was no need to panic. Still, just to be sure, they decided to check the perimeter barriers to see if anything had broken through. Meanwhile, the professor's eldest daughter approached her father and revealed that she was in love with Dr. Tramp. She expressed her desire to marry him in the future. Her father asked if Dr. Tramp felt the same way about her. She admitted that she hadn't proposed to him yet but intended to do so that very day. Without hesitation, she went straight to Dr. Tramp and confessed her feelings. However, Tramp firmly rejected her. He wasn't interested in marriage at the moment, and besides, he was already in love with someone else, a woman from the same village. Heartbroken by the rejection, the professor's eldest daughter returned home in tears. She couldn't bear the thought of being rejected. At this point, we are shown the same madman who was always laughing without reason. He had come to visit Dr. Tramp along with Ivy, a young woman. Ivy was none other than the professor's younger daughter, and she was well aware that her older sister had been rejected by Tramp. As they were talking, Tramp noticed a red-colored fruit in the madman's hand. He was taken aback. Where had this fruit come from? The villagers believed that red-colored objects attracted the deadly creatures, which was why no one ever kept anything red inside the village. When questioned, the madman revealed that he had found the fruit deep inside the forest. Tramp took this revelation seriously and kept it in mind. The following day, another meeting of the village's senior members was called. This time, Tramp stood up and made an important announcement. He revealed that the madman had been holding a red fruit that he had picked from deep within the forest, meaning he had crossed over to the other side of the woods. And yet, nothing happened to him, not even the dangerous creatures harmed him. This made it clear that those creatures might not be as deadly as they were believed to be. Taking this as proof, Tramp once again pleaded with everyone to let him leave the village. He wanted to travel to the city and bring back advanced medicines, which could save lives. However, despite his reasoning, no one agreed to let him go. Frustrated, Tramp returned home in tears and confided in his mother. He told her that his only goal was to help the villagers by bringing back medicine so that no one else would have to die. He couldn't understand why they were refusing to let him go. It was then that his mother revealed the truth. Years ago, his father had also left the village in a similar manner. But before he could reach his destination, he was captured by a group of bandits. They looted all his belongings, killed him, and threw his body into the sea. This meant that the world outside the village was cruel and merciless, where innocent people like them could be crushed in an instant. Tramp's mother didn't want to lose her only son, which is why she was so adamant about not letting him go. As Tramp processed everything his mother had told him, his eyes fell on a black box in their house. He suddenly remembered seeing a similar box in the house of the man whose son had recently died. Curious, Tramp asked his mother what was inside the black box. However, she warned him that opening the box was against the village's rules. It had to remain a secret. The next day, Tramp was still overwhelmed with confusion. Determined, he set out toward the forest. After traveling for a while, he spotted the same red fruits that the madman had brought back. As he began collecting them, he noticed something eerie, a figure standing not too far away, dressed in red clothing. The figure was watching him intently. However, it didn't attack him. Tramp quickly rushed back to the village and told Ivy everything, how he had entered the forest, what he had seen, and that the creatures hadn't harmed him. Ivy was terrified. She urged him to stop, warning that this could be extremely dangerous. But Tramp reassured her. He explained that if he managed to bring medicines from outside, no one in the village would have to die from disease again. Everything he was doing was for the good of the villagers. Ivy understood Tramp's emotions, but she still refused to let him go into the jungle. Then, Ivy revealed that her elder sister's marriage had already been fixed with someone else, and now it was her turn to get married. That meant that whoever wanted to marry her would have to come and ask for her hand. Blushing, Ivy went inside the house. Now, we see Tramp's friend standing at the very edge of the jungle, keeping watch. Suddenly, he started hearing some noises from below. As soon as he looked down, he saw those dangerous creatures in red approaching the village. Without wasting any time, Tramp's friend rang the alarm bell, signaling to the villagers that the dangerous creatures were coming their way. Hearing the loud bell, all the villagers quickly understood the situation and started running into their homes. However, Dr. Tramp wanted to see what those creatures actually looked like, so instead of going inside his house, he hid to the side. The creatures had long, sharp spikes on their backs and extremely long arms. Meanwhile, Ivy was still standing at the door, waiting for Tramp because she secretly loved him and wished for him to be her husband. But she had no idea that a dangerous creature was slowly advancing toward her. When Tramp noticed this, he immediately sprinted toward Ivy. Just in time, he grabbed her hand and pulled her inside the house. They quickly ran into the bunker and hid there. Within minutes, the creatures left the village. The next morning, when the villagers stepped out of their houses, they saw red paint on their doors. It was a clear warning from the monsters that they did not want the villagers to enter their jungle. Once again, the senior members of the village held a meeting to find out who had gone into the jungle and provoked the creatures. Tramp stood up and admitted his mistake, explaining that he had indeed gone into the jungle, but he had no intention of provoking the creatures. Even though Tramp had made a grave mistake, he sincerely apologized, so the senior members forgave him. However, they strictly warned him never to repeat such a mistake, as it could cost many lives. Finally, we see the wedding scene of Ivy's elder sister, where all the villagers are gathered together, celebrating with joy. Ivy's entire family is extremely happy. Now, Ivy was the only one left in her family who was yet to get married. Everyone was enjoying the celebration when suddenly, the sound of a woman screaming echoed from the jungle. The villagers immediately became alert and rushed back to their homes. Soon, they discovered that many of their animals had been killed and hung up. This was definitely the work of those dangerous creatures. Fearing for their safety, everyone quickly hid inside the bunkers built within their homes. However, Dr. Tramp once again made a bold decision. He refused to go inside. Instead, he went and sat right in front of Ivy's house. When Ivy noticed him sitting outside, she stepped out and sat beside him. Curious, she asked, "What are you doing in front of my house?" Tramp replied, "I want to protect you. If that dangerous creature comes here, I will fight it and save you." At that moment, Tramp finally confessed his love for Ivy. From the very beginning, he had never loved Ivy's elder sister but had always had feelings for Ivy. That was the reason he had rejected her sister's proposal. Deep down, Ivy also liked Tramp, which is why they grew even closer to each other. The next day, when everyone found out about their relationship, Tramp's mother decided that they should get married without any delay so that the two lovers could be united. However, when the mentally unstable boy in the village heard about this, he became extremely heartbroken. He had spent most of his time with Ivy and feared that if she married Tramp, he wouldn't be able to be with her anymore. The thought of growing distant from Ivy terrified him. Consumed by jealousy and desperation, he took a drastic and dangerous step. He went straight to Dr. Tramp and, without warning, stabbed him in the stomach with a knife. Tramp was severely injured from the sudden attack, and blood started pouring out rapidly. The unstable boy believed that if Tramp was no longer around, Ivy wouldn't marry him and would never leave his side. With his hands covered in blood, he ran toward the villagers, showing them what he had done. The villagers were utterly horrified and filled with fear. Everyone started looking around to find out who the mad boy had injured. Upon investigation, they discovered that he had wounded Dr. Tramp, who had already lost a lot of blood. When Ivy found out, she broke down in tears. Without wasting time, they called another doctor from a nearby village to treat Tramp. However, Ivy and everyone else knew that their village lacked proper medical facilities, making it difficult to save him. The doctor bandaged Tramp's wounds but informed them that due to excessive blood loss, his chances of survival were very slim. Determined to save him, Ivy made a bold decision. She would leave the village, no matter what, and travel to the city to find advanced medicines that could save Tramp's life. Even if the creatures in the jungle killed her, she would still consider herself fortunate, as she had risked her life for him. The doctor admitted that he had done everything he could, but only advanced medicines could save Tramp now, something their village simply didn't have. At this point, Ivy turned against the entire village. She declared that she would cross the jungle and go to the other side, but her father desperately tried to stop her. He reminded her of how her grandfather had made the same mistake and lost his life. Ivy's father didn't want to lose her at any cost, so he tried his best to convince her not to go into the jungle. But Ivy stood firm. She explained how deeply she loved Tramp. He was the first man who was willing to sacrifice his life for her, and now that it was her turn, she wouldn't back down. Determined, she set out towards the jungle to leave the village, accompanied by several others who supported her. All of them wore yellow-colored robes. As soon as Ivy and her companions ventured deeper into the jungle, they began hearing strange noises. These were none other than the sounds of the terrifying creatures lurking in the darkness. Except for Ivy, her companions were so terrified that they didn't dare to venture further into the jungle. Overcome by fear, they both ran back toward the village, leaving Ivy completely alone in the eerie forest. She was utterly confused and had no idea which direction to take. Lost and uncertain, she stopped near a tree. At that moment, she recalled her father's words. Before she had left, her father had tried to ease her fears by making her touch the skin of one of the so-called creatures kept in their storeroom. However, that was not a real creature, it was merely a fabricated figure, yet Ivy had been extremely scared of it. Her father had then taken her outside and explained that creatures like those didn't actually exist. The half-human, half-animal figure in the storeroom was part of an elaborate plan devised by the senior villagers. The purpose was to ensure that no one dared to leave the village because the outside world was cruel and merciless, where people like them wouldn't survive. This revelation meant that the creatures beyond the village were nothing but a myth, deliberately spread by the villagers themselves. Still, Ivy questioned her father, asking where all the terrifying sounds had come from and who had been slaughtering their animals so brutally. Her father admitted that the villagers themselves were responsible for creating those fears to keep everyone under control. Now that Ivy knew the truth, that there were no real creatures outside the village, she regained her confidence and continued her journey out of the jungle. She kept moving forward, determined to reach her destination. At one point, she fell into a deep pit but, refusing to give up, she found a way to climb out. Just as she was regaining her composure, she suddenly heard the same terrifying cries of the creatures echoing through the forest. To her horror, when she turned around, she saw one of the supposed dangerous creatures standing right behind her, draped in a red cloak. But Ivy couldn't understand. Her father had assured her that creatures like these didn't exist, so what was this thing doing here? Desperate to hide, she darted behind the trees. However, the terrifying creature had already spotted her and began chasing her relentlessly. Its body was covered in sharp, spiky thorns, making it look even more menacing. Ivy kept running as fast as she could until she reached a sharp, pointed tree branch. Just as the creature lunged at her, she quickly moved aside, causing it to impale itself on the branch. The creature let out a final shriek before collapsing, lifeless. Ivy had used her quick thinking to defeat the monstrous being. Meanwhile, back in the village, the people were furious with Ivy's father. They accused him of breaking the long-standing rule. Why had he allowed his daughter to leave the village? It had been a strict agreement among all the elders that no one would ever cross the boundaries. To defend himself, Ivy's father finally revealed the truth to everyone. He confessed that, many years ago, his own father had been brutally killed by bandits outside the village, all for money. Those merciless people had taken his father's life simply for wealth. And it wasn't just his father, many of their people had fallen victim to those ruthless criminals who saw human lives as nothing more than a game. The only thing they cared about was money and power. Fearing for their safety, Ivy's father and his friends had made a decision. They would create a village where no one had wealth or luxury. They built a community that relied only on natural resources, living in harmony and isolation. To ensure that no one ever ventured beyond the village, they had created the terrifying myth of the creatures. They knew that, in the future, their children might question what lay beyond the village, so they fabricated the legend to instill fear. The village elders themselves had designed the creature costumes and orchestrated the horrifying scenarios to make everyone believe that monsters lurked outside. They made sure that anyone who dared to leave would be too scared to take a step beyond the borders. And so, for years, this cycle had continued. Inside the houses of all the villagers, there was a black box that contained nothing but their memories, all of which originated from outside this village. Now, we are shown the family of the mad boy who, upon entering their house, discovered that their black box had been opened, and someone had stolen the creature's costume from inside. This reveals a shocking truth. The mad boy had taken the creature's costume and had gone into the forest to scare Ivy. But inside the jungle, Ivy truly believed that it was a real creature, and in an attempt to save her own life, she ended up killing him. The mad boy never imagined that a prank would cost him his life. This means that the one who attacked Ivy in the jungle was not a real creature but that mad boy, who had now met a terrible fate. Ivy somehow manages to cross the jungle and reach the highway, where she spots a police officer. She approaches him and urgently explains that it is an emergency and that she needs certain medicines. She tells him that deep within the dense forest, there is a secluded village where some patients desperately need these medicines. Although the police officer finds it hard to believe that anyone could be living in the middle of that forest, he understands the emergency and provides Ivy with all the necessary medicines. Ivy quickly takes the medicines and returns to her village, hoping to save the injured doctor. When she returns, she tells everyone that she went beyond the forest and brought back the medicines. She also mentions encountering the dangerous creature but somehow managing to defeat it. Now, the mad boy's parents realize that the creature Ivy encountered was none other than their own son, who had most likely died. However, Ivy's father consoles them, saying that whatever happened was for the best. After this incident, all the villagers start believing that the creatures truly exist in the jungle. Even Ivy, who still does not know the complete truth, continues to believe that the creature was real. With the help of the medicines, Ivy's beloved doctor recovers. After this moment, none of the villagers ever felt the need to leave the village again, and thus, our story comes to an end.